Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Donna. I'm with the College Success Foundation and with the Washington Passport Network. Thank you for joining us for webinar 2. This is part 2 of talking about passport to careers as it relates to unaccompanied homeless youth. And this afternoon, I have a few guest speakers with me, a couple from institutions, and then Don from the Washington Student Achievement Council, who will be presenting. We will have time at the end to ask questions. So, oops, why is this not working? Oh, okay. I'll go ahead and let the presenters introduce themselves first.
Hi, I'm Dawn Cipriano McCafferty. I am the Assistant Director for the Passport to Careers program with the Washington Student Achievement Council, and I've actually been with the program since it was started in 2007.
And I'm Christy Jewell from the Passport to College program at Centralia College, and I have been a part of the program since we got the program rolling in 2008.
Hi, I'm Molly Patterson. I'm a financial aid counselor here at Western Washington University, and I'm the assigned financial aid counselor for unaccompanied homeless youth here at Western.
Thank you. Okay, so some of the learning outcomes that we have for the attendees today. Thank you if you joined us for the first webinar last week and for joining us this afternoon. Today we'll have an opportunity to hear about partnership efforts that Christy Jewell is doing at Centralia College with their local school districts on identifying and verifying passport students as passport students who are also unaccompanied homeless youth. We'll hear from Molly and the practices that they're doing at Western Washington in awarding students for the Passport Scholarship. And then we'll also hear from Don about the re-verification process and housing stability definition. So if you have questions during this presentation, please use the chat function. I'll be monitoring questions throughout the presentation, and then at the end, we'll have some time to do some Q&A. Christy, would you like to start us off?
Absolutely. So good afternoon. I'm just really excited to be able to share a couple of the things that we are finding to work for this new population, but I also want to just really state it out there that I'm excited at the end of this opportunity today to be able to hear what else may be working in other campuses, and I would like to incorporate some of those things. So in no way have it all put together, but we do have some history, having worked with foster youth coming to our campus for many years, that we've implemented that and then beyond. So I was asked to mention how many students that we're currently serving, and we have 16 students that we are serving. We have 11 that are currently identified as UHY students. For fall quarter, we've received funding for 9 students, and 7 of those are UHY. The reason that we have other students, higher number in the previously mentioned numbers there, is because we have one student who has aged out, but she's still very much a part of our program as she's finishing her studies. And then we have a student who's in our GED program, and we have a student who's in our 18 to 21 special services program. It's called Visions. And then we have 3 that have been enrolled, and they are sitting waiting for the January start date. So that's why the numbers appear bigger. We're serving, even though we're not bringing in the funds for those students, we're still very much actively serving. So Donna, when she approached me, asked if I would share a little bit about how we began our partnership with school districts and other personnel so that we would have a seamless entry for this new population, McKinney-Vento students. And so I immediately reached out in the spring, knowing that we had a July 1st begin date. We decided to connect with our school districts to see if we can engage the liaisons, the counselors, and meet students. And I had one district out of our 13 that really rose up and they said, absolutely, if you would like to come to our campus and meet with students, we would be glad to do that. So we met with the high school and we met with an alternative high school in the same school district. And so that became kind of our pilot experience. And so having met those students in the spring, we got the basic initial FAFSA and the paperwork to be able to get started moving towards college. And then we invited students to engage with us for the entire summer, actually. So they were coming in on a regular basis to get familiar with us and then also to get familiar with our campus. And so that's our first thing that I really, really wanted to share, that, and I'll mention it again a little bit later, but how the earlier the better, so that you establish relationships. We have always had a coordination on our campus with actually internal on our campus and external community agencies also because of our service with foster youth. But that became even more important as we realized that our new population come in from a variety of ways. So we don't have the social worker or the foster parent connecting with us, and we begin to realize who's coming to campus. We have had 3 different points of entry, and I think that's really, really important for everybody to really think about. Where are students potentially going to start their college interest? Is it going to be with the counseling office? Is it going to be in financial aid? It could be TRIO because they've reached out during the ETS in high school. They've educational talent search and TRIO workers are in the schools. So it potentially could be them. It could be the enrollment front desk personnel. Where they just walk up to the counter and say, okay, here I am, what do I do? And it could be any other office. It could be your Work First office. It could be, just a variety of places. So that's a little bit new. It also could be through our school district counselors or the liaisons. And then the third way is that I've had a couple students that just walk through the doors. They saw our sign. We have a big standing sign in the window, and they happened to see that. They asked a couple questions when they got over to the financial aid office, and then they were immediately sent back to us. So a little bit different, and we have to really develop those inter-campus champions, somebody in each office, in the counseling office, in the financial aid office, in the TRIO office, that will know that when somebody says, I have been homeless or I have been a McKinney-Vento student, that they will send them immediately to us so that we can then take on the kind of the role with them from that point forward, or work in tandem. Like in TRIO, if they're going to be a TRIO student and they're going to work with us, then we work together. But each office needs to know where to send the students. So implementation during the first year, mentioning the highlights there, we absolutely have experienced why we wanted to start the summer program, because students have come, they've been there all, several times during the summer, and then when the first week of school started and they had different needs. I need to get my books, or I need this, I need that. Where do I go? And we would walk with them. They knew exactly where to come. A good example of how the stress happens pretty fast with our students, had one student come in and he had been faithfully meeting with us. Our financial aid office decided to disperse the balance check, the remainder of the balance check separately. So we had a balance check in the first week of school, and all of our students had enrolled early enough that they had their balance check on week 1, which doesn't always happen. So that was huge. And then the passport balance was left for a couple weeks to make sure that the students were on campus and intending to run the course of staying for the quarter. And then they released a check, and this was about 2 weeks later. So it was a smaller check, but it was kind of a fun, nice little surprise in our eyes and in several of our students' eyes when they came in and said, hey, I got a passport check. But this one young man came in panicked because he is attending 3/4 time. And so when he got this second check, he thought that the first one was going to have to be given back, and that the second check was really what he had for the quarter. Now, the cool thing is that he had banked it. He hadn't gone out and spent it. And so if he had to return it, he was sitting fairly good. He works and he has a nice little savings account. But that was just such a perfect example to me of how students interpret things differently. And so we have to be really, really careful that they have that awareness. Yes, you're getting a second check, and this is actually on top of that other one. So could have gone bad really, really quick. So the second highlight is that our students are checking in faithfully. They seem to be really, really responsible. All of our students actually have a job off campus, which is kind of a new thing. All of our foster students have not always been employed. And so I was kind of concerned they were going to try to balance this thing, but they are all doing beautifully. And they're connecting, they're calling, and they're texting if they can't make an appointment, and rescheduling. And they've just really, really been on their game. So huge highlight for right now. And then the momentum that we are beginning to see. So we called all the school districts. We met with one in the spring. And as of now, I'm really happy to report. So that same school district had scheduled us for after October 1. Would you please come? Would you help them fill out their FAFSA? Would you help them with their applications, etc.? So we've already been there, right? Like the week after the FAFSA opened, and we met at both the alternative school and the typical high school. And as of now, just this past week, we have scheduled 4 more of our school districts. And we're going to be going out. What we did with our pilot program, we met with all the counselors together, and then they called in one student at a time, and we worked with them individually. We're planning to use that same model now with 4 more additional districts. So I think we finally have the momentum started. They're beginning to see the college DSS role, and I've just kept at it. I've got a program coordinator that has continued to call, and when they're not calling back, we just called again, and we're like, we really, really want to come out and meet with your students. And so it's happening.
And you also hosted a FAFSA night at your institution.
We hosted a FAFSA night, and I think we struggle because we're a rural school area, and transportation. There's really literally no public transportation, and not like having a foster parent where we might have been able to engage them to bring students. It was after hours, and so the liaisons didn't have any role. And so I think a lot of students just couldn't make it. So we're finding that really reaching out and going to the schools is probably our best bet. And we meet them during the school day. And if the counselor will really engage with us, help us to pull students one at a time, we can actually I did 13 within about a 2.5 hour period. So it goes pretty quickly. Challenges, just communication and connection with our district liaisons. My dream in our area is that we would eventually pull everybody together so that we can share the program and have that understanding and that trust of what we do and why we want to meet with students. I think that's really crucial. And we're going to just continue working at that. The knowledge of basic needs and resources, we've worked, and I work out of a family development office, and so we're very in tune with basic need, food resources and housing resources and that kind of thing. But I just encourage, especially new DSSs in their role, that it's really crucial that you know where and how to connect students in a pretty efficient way. So my challenge. And then financial aid challenge, when I connected, we have one specific financial aid officer who has worked with me since the inception of our program. And she said that she would really love to have a uniform letter from OSPI so that they don't have to try to recognize this letter. It would have a standard look that they can just immediately code. And then correct dates on the letters. We've had to send back a few, and I know that's happened across the state. So we just need to get on top of that. We're all learning. Everybody's learning this whole thing. And so I'm sure, I'm confident that this can be rectified fairly easily. But anyway, that was one of the things that she mentioned. And then another key concern on my part is that I explain the Passport Scholarship probably in a different way than we do with our foster youth. It's always been so exciting when you meet with them and you say, we've got a scholarship, we need to get you enrolled before your 21st birthday, but then we have 4 years of service. And so you can choose a 2-year degree, or I will help you to move to the next university to finish off your 4-year degree. And that's always been just a real common conversation. That's how I introduce it. And it just hit me recently, like I have to be very careful until we get real clear lines of how our service is going to happen. If this is a 1 year, then I need to be very careful that we have this opportunity this year for you. And then we would have that conversation again in years that follow. But that was just one little aha on my part recently.
Thanks, Christy.
Thank you. And then prepping. So what we're doing, and I've kind of already alluded to it here, getting ready for a second year. We figured we wanted to establish relationships with our incoming students through the course of the whole year. So our 2020 students, as many as we can meet between now and the end of the school year, the better. And in connecting with our financial aid officer, she said that she's now really at her outreach nights, which they do on a regular basis to all 13 school districts. She is including quite a large piece of information about Passport, and I guess that's fairly new. Then meeting with students early on, that's exactly what we're doing from this point forward. And then meeting with local school district staff. I think that was hugely beneficial. When I met with our large Centralia school district, we had 6 counselors all sitting at the table together. And that was the day that I met with all the students afterwards. But to be able to have all of our counselors at once get the information, here's the update, this is what it looks like, huge. Because now they're all calling me and they're talking about the student that they have, or a new student that just moved into the district and things like that. So we've begun that collaboration.
Okay, thanks, Christy.
And that is the last, so thank you so much.
All right, so I think this is me. Again, I'm Molly Patterson. I work in the financial aid office in the Scholarship Center here at Western Washington University. So I was asked to talk about what we're doing currently to kind of identify and our work currently with unaccompanied homeless youth. So for Western, we currently have 58 passport eligible unaccompanied homeless youth. So there are others that, you know, are from the qualify under foster, but we have 58 currently that qualify under the unaccompanied homeless youth provision. So then overall, though, we have 77 students on campus who have identified as unaccompanied homeless youth, at least on the FAFSA, and been, you know, confirmed by our office. So some of those who are not passport eligible are maybe older, not a Washington State resident, potentially a couple little one-off scenarios like that. So we, from my understanding, Don has said we have a pretty high number of these students that we've reported as eligible to WASAC. So one thing that Western had in place already before Passport to College was kind of opened up to this population was that we had a single point of contact already in our office who was focusing part of their time on working with and reaching out to these students who identified as unaccompanied and homeless on the FAFSA. So we had an associate director come in a couple years ago who came from Colorado, and that Colorado is a state that has a single point of contact model for their institutions. Basically, from what I understand, it's some other states are very proactive and kind of having this funneled model of identifying these students and having kind of a single support model. So this was something that she came in with as important. She felt like for Western to kind of have a similar, although unofficial, sort of model going. So we have been reaching out for the last 3 to 4 years specifically to students who identify this way, reminding them to do their FAFSA every year. And we are just kind of generally providing a designated person here in financial aid that will assist them. So I am now that person. Another thing that we have going at Western that we just started is we're starting a Western Success Scholars program. So the Passport Designated Support Staff, the DSS, it was hired almost a month ago, or will be new anyway. This person will be serving both the former foster youth and unaccompanied homeless youth as identified, on the FAFSA. So it includes Passport students, but not just limited to the Passport to College students. So that program is still kind of figuring out what everything is going to look like in terms of support services, but we do have meetings in place. Students are coming to get together. There was a dinner last night where students got to participate, and of course our the kind of ratio is tilting higher now toward unaccompanied homeless youth, kind of being more the bulk of the attendees at this point. So we're seeing engagement like Christy is from just kind of doing outreach. So when we got our list of students who we identified as eligible for Passport, who are unaccompanied homeless youth, we started to do some outreach via email and let them know, hey, you've been identified. Here's how the scholarship funding will work, and explaining the process, and also explaining that you could be eligible for support services through our Western Success Scholars program. So that is still kind of in process, and we're learning about how to best support students outside of just the financial aid piece. So we have, and in case anybody else is using Banner, we were able to keep track of these students. We have special coding here in Banner, or kind of a way to track students who have answered this question on the FAFSA, and we ask for follow-up documentation and try to code them in a way that they become my specific, file of if they turn in a form or something along those lines, like I'm the one that's looking at that, and I am available extra time to meet with students to answer financial aid questions, but I'm not the Passport DSS. I just want to make that clear too. So one thing we do here that before our associate director came in, we weren't necessarily doing very well, I think, is there is, as if you're a financial aid person, you're probably aware of the Dear Colleague letter that came out a couple of years ago that explains, that and kind of reiterates that financial aid administrators can and should be able to make a determination about a student's unaccompanied homeless youth status if they don't have maybe documentation from a other, kind of more formal scenario. So that is something that we've been doing, and I think with our outreach with emailing students, letting them know that they need to come in and maybe do this questionnaire again if they don't have their letter. I think a lot of common things that we see is students will have their letter from high school. They qualify that year, the date works on whatever letterhead. As Christy pointed out, it's not always consistent what the letter says, but if you can get down to the dates work and that works, that's all good. But then there's no real letter the next year, and maybe their situation is functionally the same, or they might qualify. So we have kind of a form that we use to document the student's situation if they don't have a way to or have a letter from a different agency or something like that that would meet the FAFSA criteria. So you can see here we have the a little shot of the questions that we ask. At this time, we're using kind of open-ended questions to get down to the heart of what we need to know for students to determine whether or not they are going to meet the conditions for this FAFSA year, for the FAFSA year in question, to meet the unaccompanied homeless youth determination. So these open-ended questions, a lot of times it's just, talking with the student, something they may say may prompt me to ask another question, but it allows us to kind of focus in on the when, the where, the what, and not the why of, determining whether they meet those criteria. So this is another example of the what I was saying about the interview. So this student in particular, this is kind of showing, the questions that I asked the student. They were talking about their living situation. They had answered the question. I think they are 20 years old, and they had answered the question on the FAFSA saying that, I believe I'm unaccompanied homeless youth, but I don't have a letter from any other agency or something like that. So anyway, they referred to me to have an interview. And so I kind of asked questions. We got down to the heart of it, and I kind of figured out after we were talking that pretty clearly they met the time frame because they were living out of their vehicle during the dates in question. So the FAFSA, for this year, it actually starts July 1st, 2018 as to when they could potentially be experiencing this event. So kind of this allows us to kind of narrow down what, when, and what was going on in order to determine their eligibility. And then back on the previous slide, there is, we use institutionally just to kind of keep track too of any of the services that we may have referred a student to, or if, we have food credit or meals that we can provide for students, just any other thing that if we wanted to track that, we could as well using this form. So this is a resource that I've used a couple times so far. I've only been in this position for a couple months, since June. And this National Center for Homeless Education, what I use the most really is the email, because there are staff available to answer a question. If I have a kind of a odd scenario, I can't quite figure out whether this is meeting a certain definition, I found that to be really helpful for me in order to kind of make some calls before about whether or not a student's situation might meet the definition of homeless in a certain scenario.
Thanks, Molly.
Of course.
Okay, before we get to your section, Dawn, I just wanted to point out we have a question and then a comment. The first comment is, if a student's homeless liaison is from high school is aware of the student's housing situation in years after high school graduation, the liaison can provide another letter verifying the student's continuing status as UHY. And then this is a question from Laura Clark. Let's see. Sorry, Laura, I'm trying to understand. Says, if I get a letter the first year, second year there is no connection to high school, are you saying that campuses should do? And then Laura commented also that she believes that Clark, they re-signed a statement saying that the situation has not changed.
Yeah, so that makes sense to me. And each institution can choose to have their own policy. So that works.
Okay. Okay, that's all we have for now, Dawn.
All righty. So moving on. I'm just going to really quickly talk about some re-verification and housing stability situations that we've been asked about in the past. If you are a designated support staff person, or if you're working in financial aid with Passport, you just received an email from me today telling you that there is no, WASAC does not require institutions to, have students complete a different application or have, nothing has changed regarding determining eligibility for Passport regarding unaccompanied homeless youth and the regular financial aid practices that have been used in the past. So if an institution chooses to not do verification for the student that indicates that they're unaccompanied homeless on their FAFSA, and that's what they've been doing in the past, that's WASAC is saying, stick to your standard policy and continue moving forward on that. One of the things that we have provided is a housing questionnaire that we actually developed for an in-house purpose. So in those situations where the financial aid office is not able to determine the student's eligibility for Passport because of maybe a more complicated issue, institutions can still refer the student to WASAC, and we have a housing questionnaire that they can fill out. So we'll take a look at that housing questionnaire and do, similar to what Molly was talking about, do an interview process with the student, possibly on the phone or in person if it's required, to kind of get a feel of what their status is. So anyway, that application is available to institutions, and I believe it's on the Washington Passport Network website as a resource. So you can use that if you'd like, but it's definitely not required. And then if you do choose to have a student fill out the housing questionnaire and you're just going to be using it in-house, WASAC does not need a copy of that housing questionnaire. You can just keep it in the student's file on campus. Again, if you have to refer the student out because of a more complicated status, then you can go ahead and send the housing questionnaire directly to me, and we'll work on that. We get a lot of questions about, well, what is stable housing? What does that look like? And I wanted to make clear that dorms are not considered stable housing because it is a temporary situation. A student, has to move out during the holidays and they move out during the summer. It's not a stable housing situation. So basically that does not count. So a student can still be considered unaccompanied homeless if they're living in a residence hall. If the student is on a lease, then that could be considered stable housing. But I would again refer you back to the McKinney-Vento definition of what housing instability is and see if your student fits in that criteria. And then I just wanted to make clear that a student that is an unaccompanied homeless youth, which I think Molly and Christy had both alluded to it earlier, there are situations where they could be eligible one year and then not eligible the following year because of their housing situation. So yeah, a student could come in and come out of eligibility, in the time that they're in school. And it's not, if the financial aid office knows that the student's housing status has changed and that the student is in stable, consistent housing, then yes, they could change. But we're not asking institutions to check that multiple times a year. If you're just doing their financial aid packaging once a year, then that's fine. And then I wanted to say that foster youth, this is where it's kind of different. So foster youth do not have to have their eligibility re-verified each year. Once a student is determined eligible for Passport through the foster care status, then they're good to go for the rest of their academic period.
Thanks.
Okay, I think we have a question here.
I didn't see something come through. Oh, it was just Laura confirming.
Okay.
Okay, we're gonna move into scenarios. So we only have a couple here posted, and this is an opportunity for webinars attendees to engage. Feel free to type in your scenarios into the chat box, or you can put it into the Q&A. We'd like to hear from folks, like, what are situations and scenarios that you've come across so far that you're looking to get feedback on, not unsure about the status. Let's see. Oh, and we have one question. So the question is, so if eligible 1 year, then not, and eligible the next year, they can have funds until they age out?
Yeah, so freshman year, they come in, they're eligible, and then sophomore year, they're not eligible, and then junior year, they're back in an unstable situation, and they're eligible for Passport again. Yeah, they can have it until age 26.
Okay, thanks for clarifying. Okay, so we'll go ahead and get started with the first two scenarios that are posted on here, and then we'll, as we get more, I'll monitor the chat function and let the guest panelists know. So the first one that we've heard is there have been some students that have brought a McKinney-Vento letter into the financial aid office with the wrong date. What do you all suggest they do?
Would you like me to?
Yeah, Christy, I think we talked about this too, if you wanted to share some of your experience.
Yes. So when the letter has a wrong date, I think it's one of those things as a DSS that I want to come beside the student and ask them if they would like some help in being able to get this letter rectified. I know for some, they may want to put this on the student, like you need to go back to your school district and you need to, bring it back to us. But we need to think how the student is 18 coming out of high school. I always think about my own children when they were, exiting when they were youth, exiting to go to college. There's a lot of growth that happens. And so I don't have any problem with helping to get the right person that we need to connect with and kind of do some advocacy with them. If I've asked them, would you like some help? I think that's really important because they can get a runaround. And I know that we had a couple students that struggled during the summer, and that was just a waiting game until the principal and counselors come back on in August. But I definitely did it office to office.
Thanks, Kissy. Okay, second scenario we have here is a student's unable to obtain a letter from their McKinney-Vento liaison. Do you have any suggestions? This has already been answered too a bit. Dawn, if you wanted to.
So if the student's unable to obtain a letter from the McKinney-Vento liaison, they can get a letter from a third party that validates their situation. Church member or any third party person that can validate their situation, we could take a look at that. Or they can go ahead and complete the housing questionnaire and we would do, either an interview with the student or take a look at what is provided to us. So I guess it's just basically about gathering information and taking a look at the whole picture and trying to understand what, where the student is, what they're going through, and whether or not they fit in that definition of unaccompanied homeless.
Okay, I don't see anything coming through the queue. Maybe we'll wait a little bit. Okay, I'll move on to the next slide, and if folks wanted to share out something, feel free to enter that into Q&A or the chat box. Okay, so as we are wrapping up this webinar, reminder that the webinar and the recording will be uploaded onto our YouTube channel, and all of the presentations that we've done last year and so far this year are live or on our YouTube channel, and the link will be included in a follow-up email that you'll receive tomorrow. In that follow-up email, you'll also receive a link to complete a quick survey. It shouldn't take you more than a few minutes. Would love to get feedback on and your input on how we can improve the webinars. If you have ideas for topics, let us know what you found most helpful in this webinar. And the webinar itself will be uploaded as a PDF copy onto our Washington Passport Network website. And so if you'd like to obtain a copy of that, it will be up in the resource tab later this week as well. And then the next webinar that we have scheduled is for Wednesday, December 4th from 2 to 3 p.m. We have Lawyers Fostering Independence presenting on knowing your housing rights. So they'll be sharing presentation and tips on understanding housing rights for students as a tenant and relationship with landlord. And Lawyers Fostering Independence also offer a variety of services for young people as well. So if you're looking for information about how to support students around their legal rights, this is a great workshop for you to attend. And that's all we have. I don't see.
One more thing. We did have a question pop up in the Q&A box about
right.
contact information for other designated support staff and financial aid administrators throughout the state of Washington. So we do have a couple of lists available to you. There's a resource on the Washington Passport Network website that you can access.
Mm-hmm.
And then on the WASAC side, there are readysetgrad.wa.gov website. If you go to readysetgrad.wa.gov/passport, it'll take you to our page, and then you can click on a link that says designated support staff. And that'll provide you with a list of the campus leaders, designated support staff, and financial aid administrators that are specifically trained in Passport on each college campus.
Great, thank you. Well, thank you everyone for joining us this afternoon. Thank you to our panelists and guest speakers. That's all we have.
All right, thanks everyone.
Bye everyone, thanks.
Thank you, bye-bye.
Christina.